The lights were already hot when Caroline pulled the diary from her purse. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady, too steady. Across from her, Melissa froze. The cameras caught everything. A daughter who'd waited 20 years for answers, and a mother who had come to give them. Dr. Phill leaned forward, expecting another emotional confession, another story of guilt and reconciliation. But this time it was different, because when Caroline opened that diary and whispered, "I didn't leave you. I saved you," the studio fell silent. Even Dr. Phil's voice caught in his throat. Inside those pages wasn't an excuse. It was evidence, a record of fear, survival, and a truth so dark it forced a mother to vanish overnight. What Dr. Phill read next would change not only how the audience saw her, but how Melissa saw her entire childhood. Because sometimes the people who hurt us are the same ones who once saved our lives. The tension inside the studio could have been cut with a knife. You could feel it, that mix of anticipation and resentment that always comes before a truth no one is ready to hear. Melissa sat rigid in her chair, her fingers twisting the edge of a tissue. Across from her, Caroline's eyes stayed low, fixed on the floor, as if she couldn't bear to see what 20 years of silence had done. Dr. Phill began softly. "Melissa, tell me what you need from your mother today." The young woman swallowed hard. Her voice trembled, but the anger underneath, it was sharp. "I need to know why she left, why she never came back. I needed my mom, and she chose to disappear." The audience shifted uncomfortably. It wasn't the explosive kind of drama they were used to. It was quiet, wounded, human, the kind of pain that lingers longer than shouting ever could. Caroline finally raised her head. Her face was pale, her eyes tired. She said just one thing. "I didn't leave because I wanted to. I left because I had to." Melissa scoffed. "That's not good enough." But Caroline didn't argue. Instead, she reached into her bag, slow and deliberate, and placed a small leather diary on the table between them. The cover was cracked, edges worn smooth by time. "This," she said softly, "is the reason I left." The camera zoomed in. Even Dr. Phill leaned forward. You could hear a pin drop. Melissa stared at the diary as if it were alive. "What is that supposed to prove?" Caroline's lip trembled. "It's not about proof. It's about survival." For a moment, Dr. Phill didn't say a word. He just studied the two women, one broken by abandonment, the other haunted by the truth she'd carried alone. Finally, he spoke. "Caroline, what's inside that diary?" Caroline took a deep breath. "The story I never wanted to tell. The one I thought would die with me." Dr. Phill nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time the world hears it." Melissa crossed her arms, but her eyes betrayed her. Beneath the anger was something else. Fear. The kind of fear that comes when the answers you've been demanding might actually destroy the version of the story you've lived by. Caroline's fingers brushed over the diary's cover. "If I told you then," she whispered, "you wouldn't have survived it." Dr. Phil's brow furrowed. "Survived what?" Caroline didn't answer. She just opened the diary to a page marked with a torn red ribbon. The ink was smudged, the words barely legible, but the date was clear. June 14th, 1998. The night she disappeared. The audience gasped, but Dr. Phill didn't speak. Not yet, because for the first time in his career, he wasn't leading the story. He was watching one unfold. One that would force him to question how far a mother's love could go before it turned into something unrecognizable. Melissa leaned forward, her voice cracking. "If you were protecting me, from what?" Caroline looked at her daughter for the first time. Really looked at her. "From a man you still call your father." The words hung in the air like smoke. Heavy, suffocating, impossible to ignore. The studio lights flickered. The audience sat frozen. Even Dr. Phill seemed at a loss for words. In that moment, everyone in the room understood something life-changing. This wasn't a story about a mother who left. It was about a mother who ran. And the truth she was about to reveal would force the world to decide. Was she a coward or a savior? Because sometimes the line between love and fear is written in the same hand, and inked in a diary no one was ever meant to read. 2 months before the cameras, before the diary, before the world watched a family's wounds spill open, Melissa's life was simple, or at least she'd convinced herself it was. She worked long shifts at a coffee shop in Chicago, lived alone in a tiny studio apartment, and told people she didn't think about her mother anymore. But that wasn't true. Every night before bed, she still checked the same old news sites, still searched for her mother's name, still wondered if Caroline was alive. And then one afternoon, it happened. A letter arrived in a plain white envelope with no return address. At first, Melissa assumed it was junk mail. But when she turned it over, she froze. The sender's name was small, shaky, written in blue pen. Dr. Phill Show, Los Angeles. She sat down at the kitchen table. Her hands were cold. She tore the envelope open. Inside was a typed letter. Dear Melissa, your mother has reached out. She wishes to reunite and share her story for the first time. Would you consider meeting her on the show? She dropped the letter, her stomach twisting. For a full minute, she didn't breathe. After 20 years of silence, this was how her mother came back. Through television? Through an audience? She laughed bitterly. Typical. But then something strange happened. That night, as she was cleaning out an old box of childhood books she'd kept tucked in a closet, something slipped out from between the pages of her favorite one, Charlotte's Web. It was a postcard. Faded, bent, the ink nearly gone. Postmarked for Nevada, dated 8 years ago. On the back, written in that same delicate handwriting she remembered tracing as a little girl, were just 3 words. Forgive me. Someday. Melissa sat there, staring at the card, the past catching up to her all at once. The handwriting was hers. The city matched where her mother was last seen. And for the first time in her adult life, the wall she'd built around her heart began to crack. She could hear her therapist's voice echoing in her head. Sometimes anger is just grief that's too proud to cry. Maybe her mother wasn't a monster. Maybe she was human, flawed, afraid, but still reaching out. Melissa picked up her phone, scrolling to the producer's number on the letter. Her finger hovered over the call button for a long time. Then, she whispered to herself, I just want to hear her say it. The call connected. A soft, calm voice answered. Dr. Phill production. This is Andrea. Melissa took a shaky breath. This is Melissa, Caroline's daughter. There was a pause, the kind that means something heavy is on the other end. Then Andrea said gently, We were hoping you'd call. That's when Melissa learned that her mother hadn't just reached out once. She'd been writing to the show for years, pleading for a chance to explain. And the reason Dr. Phill finally agreed? There was evidence. Something she'd never shared with anyone, not even the police. The diary. Melissa didn't know it yet, but that single call would set everything in motion. The reunion, the confession, the unraveling of a family secret that had been buried since 1998. She thought she was preparing for answers. But in reality, she was walking into a story she didn't know she was part of. Because sometimes, when you chase the truth, you find out the truth was chasing you first. Backstage at the Dr. Phill studio, the air was thick with nerves and makeup powder. Crew members whispered through headsets. Cameras adjusted focus. But in the green room, where Caroline sat alone, everything felt frozen in time. The diary lay on her lap, the same one that had followed her through shelters, motel rooms, and cheap bus rides across half the country. Its corners were frayed, the binding cracked. On the cover, one word was scratched in with trembling handwriting, Melissa. A young producer named Emily knocked gently on the door. Caroline, are you ready? Caroline nodded, but her voice was distant. I've been running from this moment for half my life. Emily's eyes softened. Then maybe today's the day you stop. Meanwhile, on the other side of the wall, Melissa sat with her mic being clipped on. She tried not to look at the monitor, showing her mother, just a few feet away. Every time the camera zoomed in on that diary, her chest tightened. What could possibly be in those pages that made her mother vanish for 2 decades? When Dr. Phill entered the prep room, he didn't speak right away. He simply took the diary from Caroline's shaking hands and flipped to the first page. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but the date was unmistakable. June 14th, 1998. The same day, Melissa woke up to an empty house. He began to read aloud quietly, his voice low and deliberate. If something happens to me, tell Melissa I did it to save her. Tonight, I saw what he's capable of. And I can't stay another day. Dr. Phill looked up, his face drained of expression. Who were you running from, Caroline? She swallowed hard. Her father. For a moment, even the air seemed to stop moving. Caroline explained that David, the man Melissa remembered as her playful, laughing dad, had been living a double life. Behind the charm was a darkness she hadn't seen until it was almost too late. Gambling debts, violent outbursts, threats she thought were just words until she found the photos. Dr. Phill frowned. Photos of what? Caroline's voice dropped. Of another woman, and a child who wasn't ours. He was planning to leave the country. But that night, I realized something worse. I wasn't supposed to be alive when he did. Melissa's heart pounded. You're lying, she snapped, tears burning behind her eyes. You could have told someone. You could have told me. Caroline nodded slowly, pain twisting her features. I did. I told that diary. Because no one else would listen. Dr. Phill turned to the audience. You could hear murmurs ripple through the crowd. He looked back at Caroline. You're saying you went to the police. She nodded again. They said without evidence, there was nothing they could do. They told me the best thing I could do for my daughter was disappear. Melissa's face went pale. So you left me to him? No, Caroline whispered. I left you with my sister. You were supposed to be safe. But she gave you back to him when I didn't return. For a moment, the cameras stopped moving. Even Dr. Phil's producers froze behind the glass. Melissa's voice cracked, caught somewhere between fury and heartbreak. You ran away from him, and you left me behind with him? Caroline nodded, tears streaming. Because if I had stayed, he would have killed us both. The diary slipped open in her hands, the pages fluttering like wings desperate to escape. Dr. Phill reached over gently. Caroline, can I read this next part? She nodded through tears. He read aloud. I write this knowing one day she'll hate me. But if hatred means she's alive, then it's worth it. The audience was silent. No gasps, no whispers, just stunned, human stillness. Dr. Phill looked at Melissa, his voice calm but heavy. You've lived your whole life thinking your mother ran from you. But maybe she was running for you. Melissa's breathing quickened. The anger that had defined her for 20 years suddenly felt misplaced. Confusing. Because if this diary was real, if these words were true, then everything she thought she knew about her childhood had just collapsed. But one question remained, the one no one dared to ask out loud. If her father was truly that dangerous, what happened to him after Caroline vanished? Because if he was still out there, this reunion might not just expose the past. It might wake it back up. When the cameras came back on, the energy in the studio had shifted. What started as a confrontation now felt like a crime scene, one built not of blood, but of silence. Caroline sat clutching the diary like a lifeline. Melissa sat frozen, her eyes glistening but dry, as if her tears hadn't yet received permission to fall. Dr. Phill leaned forward, his tone gentle but steady. Caroline, if you're ready, you can share what's written next. The studio lights dimmed slightly. Caroline took a breath, flipping to a page marked by that same red ribbon. Her voice trembled as she began to read. The night I left, I went to the police. They told me there was nothing they could do, that I needed to disappear before he made me disappear. A collective gasp rolled through the audience. Caroline's hands shook as she turned the page, her words coming faster now, like she'd held them back for too long. He wasn't just cheating. He was dangerous. He owed people money, bad people. He started drinking, disappearing for days, showing up with bruises, sometimes with blood on his shirt. I thought I could fix it, but one night, he came home and said, if you ever try to leave me, you'll never make it out alive. Melissa's breath hitched. He said that to you? Caroline nodded, voice breaking. And I believed him. Dr. Phil's voice was low. Did you ever think of telling your daughter the truth? Caroline looked at Melissa, truly looked at her, like she was seeing her as a grown woman for the first time. I thought about it every day. But if I told her, I'd have to relive it. And if I relived it, I wouldn't survive it. The silence stretched so long you could hear the faint hum of the studio lights. Then Caroline turned to the final entry, the one she'd written before she vanished. If she ever finds me, Tell her I never stopped loving her. I just wanted her to live long enough to hate me. For the first time, Melissa's tears fell. They weren't the tears of anger she'd imagined for years. They were confusion, grief, and a dawning empathy that frightened her. She whispered, almost to herself, "You thought leaving me would save me, but it broke me." Caroline nodded. "I know, and that's the part I'll never forgive myself for." Dr. Phill took a deep breath, glancing between them. His voice carried a weight the room could feel. Sometimes survival doesn't look like strength. It looks like guilt. And sometimes it's the people who seem like they gave up who were fighting the hardest all along. Caroline closed the diary, her fingers trembling over the cracked leather cover. Melissa turned toward her mother, voice trembling. "So all those years, when I thought you didn't love me," Caroline cut her off softly. "Every day I was gone, I loved you more." That was the curse. The camera zoomed in. The two women sat only a few feet apart, yet decades of silence separated them. And still, for the first time, neither one looked away. Dr. Phil's eyes softened. "Caroline, your daughter deserves to know what happened after you ran." Caroline hesitated. "I hid. Different names. Different cities. I never stayed anywhere longer than a year. I worked cash jobs. I watched her birthdays on news feeds from a distance. And every time I saw her face, I told myself I'd come back when it was safe." Dr. Phill leaned in. "Safe from who?" Caroline looked down. "From him." The studio audience shifted uneasily. Melissa's shoulders stiffened. "Are you saying he's still alive?" Caroline didn't answer. She looked at Dr. Phill. Her silence said enough. Dr. Phil's tone changed, protective, deliberate. "We're going to take a short break," he said to the crew, his voice cracking slightly. The cameras stopped. The audience stayed quiet. No one moved. Because everyone, including Dr. Phill, understood the gravity of what was just said. If Caroline's husband, David, really was still alive, then the danger she'd run from 20 years ago might not be over at all. And when the show returned, what they were about to reveal would shake more than just one family. It would expose a lie that reached further than anyone imagined. When the cameras stopped rolling, the studio didn't breathe. The air was heavy, thick with everything left unsaid. Producers huddled in corners, whispering into headsets, unsure if what they'd just heard was a confession or a warning. Dr. Phill walked off stage quietly, his usual calm replaced by something else, worry. He'd done thousands of interviews, but this story, it felt different. It wasn't entertainment anymore. It was survival playing out in real time. Backstage, Melissa sat in a daze, the diary still open in her hands. Every word felt like a bruise she was only now beginning to feel. For the first time, she wondered, what if her mother was telling the truth? A producer approached, hesitant. "Melissa, there's something you should know." He handed her a folder. Inside were old police records, filed under a different name, Caroline Reed. Attached were mugshots, case numbers, and a report that sent a chill through her entire body. David Harper, deceased, 2012. Cause of death, heart failure, federal custody. She blinked, confused. "Wait, he's dead." The producer nodded. "He died in prison. Your mom didn't know." Melissa's breath hitched. "She's been hiding from a ghost." The words didn't make sense, and yet they did. For 20 years, her mother had lived like a fugitive, haunted by a man who no longer existed. And now, she was sitting just a few feet away, fragile, trembling, carrying decades of unnecessary fear. When the show resumed, Dr. Phill didn't open with a question. He opened with the truth. "Caroline," he said softly, "your husband, David, passed away over a decade ago. He's gone." The color drained from Caroline's face. Her hands went limp, the diary sliding from her lap to the floor with a soft thud. "Gone," she whispered. "You're sure?" Dr. Phill nodded. "We verified it with state records. He was convicted for multiple counts of fraud and assault. He died in custody." Caroline's lips parted, but no sound came out. Years of tension collapsed at once, shoulders sagging, breath trembling, eyes unfocused. For the first time in 2 decades, she didn't have to look over her shoulder. She started to cry. Not the kind of cry you can control, but the kind that rips its way out. I gave up my whole life for nothing. Melissa watched, frozen, torn between anger and compassion. You could have come back, she said softly. You could have told me. Caroline shook her head, still sobbing. I didn't know how. Every time I tried to reach out, I saw his shadow in everything. I thought if I stayed gone, you'd stay safe. Dr. Phill leaned forward, his voice calm, grounding. You did what you thought was right with the information you had. But now you have something new, truth. What you do with it next, that's your second chance. The camera zoomed in on Melissa's face. Her jaw trembled, eyes fixed on the diary lying between them. That book had destroyed her childhood, and maybe, just maybe, it could help rebuild something new. Slowly, she reached down and picked it up. She opened to the last page, where her mother's final entry had been written in faded ink. If she ever finds me, tell her I love her. Tell her I hope she can live a life that doesn't look like mine. Melissa closed the book, tears finally falling. You were scared, she whispered. And I was angry. Maybe we were both just trying to survive in different ways. Caroline nodded, still trembling. I can't ask you to forgive me. Melissa looked at her for a long time. Good, she said quietly. Because I'm not ready to. But I am ready to try. The audience, who had been silent for nearly a minute, began to clap softly. Not for drama, but for something real. Dr. Phil's voice broke the quiet. You both lost 20 years to fear. Don't lose another minute to silence. The two women embraced, hesitant at first, but then tighter, as if both were afraid the other might vanish again. And though there were no perfect words, no full-circle happy ending, there was something even stronger, understanding. Later, backstage, Dr. Phill sat alone reviewing the footage. His producer asked, "Do we air this?" He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "Yeah, but not as a story about abandonment. As a story about what fear costs and what truth gives back. Because in the end, this wasn't a tale of a mother who left. It was the story of two women learning that sometimes love doesn't disappear. It just hides until it's safe to come home." Weeks later, the Dr. Phill episode aired to millions. But for Melissa and Caroline, the cameras weren't what changed their lives. It was what happened after they turned off. The show ended with tears and applause, but real healing doesn't happen under studio lights. It happens in silence, in small, uncertain moments that don't make television. After the taping, Dr. Phil's team arranged therapy sessions for them both. At first, Melissa refused. I've spent my whole life cleaning up someone else's mess, she said. I'm not doing it again. But one night, as she sat alone re-watching the footage, she saw something that broke her. Her mother's face, pale, terrified, fragile, when she learned the man she'd been running from was already dead. It wasn't the face of a liar. It was the face of someone who'd been trapped in her own memory. The next morning, Melissa called the therapist. I'll go, she said quietly, but only once. That once became twice. Then every week. At first, the sessions were brutal. Every word felt like reopening an old wound. Melissa spoke with anger that had no breaks. You ruined my life, she shouted more than once. Caroline sat and listened, her eyes full of tears, but her voice calm. You have every right to feel that way. And slowly, something shifted. Melissa began to realize her mother's story wasn't a fairy tale. It was a survival manual written in fear. Every choice Caroline made had been wrong and right all at once. Dr. Phill followed up with them privately for a post-show segment. Sitting in a quiet studio without an audience, he asked, "What's changed since that day?" Caroline smiled faintly, fingers tracing the edge of her diary. For 20 years, I wrote in this hoping Melissa would find it. But now we write together. Melissa looked at her mother, eyes softer than they'd been in decades. We can't rewrite the past, she said, but we can write what comes next. There was no applause this time, just a quiet stillness, the kind that feels like peace sneaking in through the cracks. Caroline had started volunteering at a shelter for women escaping abuse. She never shared her story on camera again. She didn't need to. The diary that once carried her guilt had become her guide, a way to help others find safety before it was too late. Melissa began journaling too, not to document pain, but to understand it. Her first entry read, "Forgiveness isn't a door you walk through. It's a bridge you build, one step at a time, even if you're not sure what's waiting on the other side. Months passed. Their relationship wasn't perfect. It never would be, but perfection had never been the goal. Honesty was. In the show's closing monologue, Dr. Phil's voice carried that familiar weight of compassion and truth. Sometimes, the hardest thing isn't telling the truth, it's believing you deserve to live after it's told. Caroline ran from her past to protect her daughter. Melissa ran toward it to find her mother. In the end, they both stopped running. Because peace doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from facing what we were too afraid to remember. In the final shot, Caroline and Melissa sat together on a park bench, the diary resting between them. The camera zoomed in as Caroline turned one last page, blank, waiting. She smiled at her daughter. "You ready to fill this one?" Melissa nodded. "Yeah, but this time, let's write it together." The screen faded to black. And for once, Dr. Phill didn't need to say a word. The story spoke for itself. If this story touched you, if you've ever carried a truth too heavy to share or forgiven someone you thought you never could, take a moment to write your own first page. Because sometimes, the hardest stories to tell are the ones that help someone else heal. And remember, the truth may hurt, but silence hurts longer.